Oh, hello, I'm here now with Szilárd Matusik, and he is an editor, director, and writer from Hungary. And he made the documentation Mole Man 4. It's the latest part of I can say it's a documentary about a special part of the game development in Hungary in the 80s and 80s, late 80s and 90s. And so I will hand over to you now. So that was my short introduction, and now from your side, more detailed introduction, and also tell us about your first computer and also the first video game maybe you played or you have the most memory of.
Hi, thank you. So I was born in 1984, so the Commodore 64 was already on the market. But here in Hungary, there was socialism at that time, until 89. So it was a bit later when I came across with computers, of course, when I was around 7 or 8 years old. And a cousin of mine had a Commodore 64, and I was hanging around at their house every time and playing with games. Maybe before the Commodore 64, I saw some kind of basic consoles, like, the Pong clone or things like that. But when I first fall in love with computers, that was the Commodore 64. So that's how it started. And in Hungary, back in the beginning of the 90s or until the end of the 90s, the Commodore 64 was still around. So even if the company didn't exist at that time in Hungary, many of the people, because of they can't afford new computers, they use the Commodore 64. So there was several years when that was our main computer. And mostly we played games as every kids with computers. So that was the first thing, how we started using computers. And then, of course, we started to make small programs and figured out how to make music or pictures with the computer. But games was the most important part of our life regarding the computers. So that's how we started. And many, many years later, like in 2015, maybe, or 14, I came across a story about Hungarian game developments back in the 80s. Tamás Beregi wrote a book about the beginning of the video game industry, not just about Hungary, but the whole. And a few pages were about the Hungarian game developments in the 80s. And it was such a surprise for me that such a big industry existed here in Hungary back in the 80s behind the Iron Curtain when the Commodore 64 was on the COCOM list. So even officially, they couldn't get a computer that time in Hungary.
This list means it was not allowed to export this to Hungary or other countries in the behind the Iron Curtain.
Yes. This was a restriction made by the Western countries because they were afraid that the socialist bloc will use it for weapons and rockets control, and I don't know. So I think the Commodore 64 was on COCOM list until 1985, if I am correct. So I found this story. It was just a briefly description of the story in this book, and I thought, it's really amazing, and we must know more about it, and it's a really good topic to make a documentary about it. So I contacted the writer, Tamás Beregi, and asked for a few contacts to the developers. And then I just started to contacting these developers and finding new and new stories about this historical game development in Hungary.
Yeah, and this is really fascinating for me because as you, and I think you were more surprised as me, or because I was also very surprised because I also thought, okay, behind the Iron Curtain, it was not possible to get access to there was smuggling and all the stuff, and games they made them by themselves or they were also smuggled. And then I watched your documentary, and it started with a very interesting part because the company that was founded, Nova Trade, was on the first hand not possible to be found. Could you explain this a bit?
Yes. So yeah, back in the socialism, you couldn't just start a company because there were only companies ruled and controlled by the government. And Gábor Rényi, who founded Novotrade, just found out that there is a law that was made back in the 1870s.
Okay.
So a century ago, and it was still alive. So they could say, okay, there is a law that allow us to make this company. And of course, he had some connections with the government because his father was one of the leader of the main newspaper.
Okay.
So yes, he wasn't just a guy from the street.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
he had the connection, but then he got the permission to make this company, and this was the first joint stock company of Hungary, operated not by the government. And yeah, it was this law made it possible to make this or form this company because they just forget to forget about this law, and it was still there, and they could make the company. So Gábor Rényi, who founded this company, wanted to start some new ways of companies and new ways of trading and new ways of doing business here in Hungary, like companies in the Western countries. So some kind of capitalism was introduced by Novotrade here in Hungary, and so they started to deal with new and new things. Like Novotrade means novo, like new, and trade. So lots of people had lots of ideas here, Hungary, back in that time, and they tried to find the good ideas and make new products and new things. And one day, Robert Stein, who was a Hungarian who fled to England back in the 1950s, and he started a company in England, and was a friend of the leader of the Commodore company in the UK. So he just visited Gábor Rényi and said, "You have a lot of good mathematicians and programmers here, and that's why we think that they could make good video games here. And I have the company back in England, and I can sell these video games to the Western companies, and then you can make video games here with these talented people." So Gábor Rényi said, okay, yeah, why not? It was back at the end of 82. So just right after the first Commodore 64 came out from the European factories. And they just made a competition. So everybody could send storyboards and ideas about video games. it was presented in the only in one Hungarian TV channel at that time. So all the people in Hungary know about this competition
Okay.
because everyone was watching this channel because that was the only
Oh, the
channel.
ones, yes.
Yeah, so more than 1,000 ideas came in, and they just started to figure out, okay, which idea is good enough to make a video game, and which is not. And then I think they just selected 100 ideas. They sent to the Commodore UK, and they have chosen like 10 ideas, and they just started to developing that 10 ideas back here in Hungary.
Okay, that is very fascinating because, I mean, 1982, I would suggest that most of the Germans that watch TV didn't know what a computer is for. I mean, mostly they know it maybe from the work, seen it in an office or something like this. And so I really I'm really fascinated about that 1982 in the Hungarian TV. There was a competition to create a game
Yeah, a
for
game idea, of course.
game idea
Yeah.
for a computer, and there were so many that sent in ideas. That's really fascinated.
Yes, and of course, people usually didn't know anything about
Yeah.
computers in Hungary also, but they were just like storyboards, like pictures, how
Mm.
they imagine a game and what a game could be look like. So most of them were not possible to make on a C64, because it was a huge idea, or it was just not possible to make it on a 8-bit computer.
Yep.
But yeah, back in that time, there was some uh, education at universities, but not on 8-bit computers. They were learning programming on big systems like COBOL
Yep.
and with big tapes, and it was a very different thing than the 8-bit home computers. But they were there, and they know about how a computer works and know how to make a program. So they just have to learn about this new computer architecture, like how to program this computer. But they had some very good knowledge about how to program computers. I am speaking now the people who were studying at the university, not at the people at home.
Yeah.
So there were many young stars at universities, and also some very talented older people who were working at, I don't know, a factory programming
Yeah.
something for the factory, like very basic things. And they say that it's something new. And back in that day in Hungary, behind the Iron Curtain, you couldn't just go to the NASA and make things for space exploring or big things. It was not possible here in Hungary. So when they say, hey, it's something new and we can do something that can compete with Western companies, the games, we can make such good games as Western companies or even better, then many really, really talented people started to make video games because there was no other option to make something that can compete with Western knowledge. And they could try themselves to make something that even at the Western countries could be sold.
Okay. So, after this competition, and as you said, there were very talented people, young people from university, and as you said, they're trying to make video games officially and paid, which is really different to other countries. And you, as you said, they can compete with Western games, but also, I mean, were made for the Western computers and also for the Western area. And this is one interest. What what I want to know is to um, they at first they produced games for the Commodore 64, but also for different computers, and there were really games released. When I saw your movie, I said, "Wow, I never knew," because I played these games. I said, "Okay, they were from Epics or other companies," and yeah, in the US, oh no, like which is very Scarabeus is one of the
Yes.
titles. Um, so they were released in the Western, but were they also available in Hungary?
Not really.
Not really.
There were many games made by Novotrade, and they made also games for the Hungarian market, a few smaller. It was Novotrade was not a typical company like they have people, employers, and they work at the office and something like that. But they just made the possibility to people start making games at home. So they got the computers from Novotrade. They started to develop games, and of course they checked sometime how they are going, how the development are going, and they got feedback from the Western companies who bought the game then. But it was individual teams who started to make games, and Novotrade was just the link to the Western companies. So that was the first time. Then later on the 80s, 90s, it's changed and it formed like a professional company with own employees and employers, and it worked like the other companies in the West. But in the beginning, in the 80s, it was like they were looking for talented people. They gave them computers. They told them what kind of game they want, and these small teams started to make these games. And then they sold in the West. So in Hungary, there was not a big market for video games because back in the 80s, not so many people had
Yeah,
computers. They started to smuggle in also the people and started to use, but they changed and copied the games. And this is interesting because it is the topic of our new documentary,
right.
how the people started to get computers back in the 80s
Yeah,
when it was not allowed, and how they got uh, games, how they swapped games with the Western youngsters, how they cracked games.
yeah.
So nobody bought games here in Hungary back that time. So it was not really a market for selling games here in Hungary. There was a few, but not so many. So they started to make games because Rubenstein told them that he can sell these
Mhm.
games in Western countries, like first in the UK, then also in the US. And he had the company in the UK, then in the US. So he made these connections with the big companies like Activision and Epics and
Still on the market.
yes, and they just told the Hungarians what to develop, and they developed it, and then Rubenstein sold it. So that's how it worked. The Hungarians don't really went to the West in the 80s first, but then when they started to make more and more games, they had the opportunity, even back in the socialism, to travel to the West. And they also traveled to Japan and started to make Nintendo games without an official Nintendo license and development kit. So they managed to make it.
So, so they have also for the developers, it had also so positive side effects, like traveling. So also,
Yes,
so it was. I think it was also good for the government because they paid taxes and As you said, it was a joint stock company, so I think they made good money. And was it also, good for the developers? So they had also their
Yes,
reward.
yes. So it was good for the government because they made US dollars. And you
Ah,
know, back in that day, behind the
yes,
Iron Curtain, countries didn't really have foreign currency
yes,
like US dollars.
yeah,
So, and even the developers were paid in US dollars. And it was a
yep,
really
yep.
big thing back in Hungary because you were not allowed to have US dollars. So if you work out that you have US dollars, you have to go to the prison because it was not allowed to have. Only if you work for something that where you earn the US dollar.
Ah, okay, okay.
And there were shops in Hungary where you could pay with US dollars and buy things that no one else could buy because you could buy only for US dollars, like expensive drinks, televisions, cars. Even back in the day, you have to wait 7 or 8 years for a
Yeah.
car. But if you had US dollars, you can get in a few months a car. So it was a really big privilege to have US dollars. And also, they could travel to the West and visit the UK or later the US. So it was like a window to the West for these developers. And of course, then in the 90s, the Iron Curtain went off and everything changed. But in the first few years, when they started to make these video games, it was a really big thing then to have such a connection with the Western world and have US dollars. And one of the developer bought a, a car, a Mustang, Ford Mustang,
Okay.
and it was very rare in Hungary that you can see such a Western car
Yeah, I
on
think
the
it was
streets.
very rare also in Western Germany to see
Yeah,
such a
yeah.
car. So,
So it was a really big thing to have US dollars back in that day.
okay, so it was a very, very positive side effect also for
Yeah.
the developer.
Of course, sometimes they didn't get too much money because it depends on the game and the project.
Yeah.
Sometimes they got a fixed money,
Hmm?
and they sometimes just get royalty. And if the game was not sold with in a big volume, then they didn't get too much money. But when it was sold in a big volume and they got the royalty, then it was a really good money back in that time.
Okay. You said that the Commodore 64 was at first on this COCOM list, so it was not allowed to import it. It was later not on this list. So how did they get it? I mean, this was an official company with a, we call it, license right now. Also, the government knew what they're doing. So was there official way they get the hardware, or was it still smuggling?
No, they were still smuggling. Of course, because of Gábor Rényi had this connection to the government, I think it was not a problem when it arrived here in
Okay.
Hungary. It could be a problem when it left the Western country. Like one of the leader of the studio was in the UK, and he was carrying, I don't know, 10 big luggages full of computers to the airport. And then he was asked, what are in these luggages? And he said, oh, they are just official equipment, which is true. But yeah, if they check it and, hey, these are computers that are on the COCOM list, then maybe he had to go to the jail, or maybe he had to do, he had some hard time there for sure. So yeah, they were smuggling, and And when they arrived here in Hungary, I guess it was not a problem then. But leaving the UK or I don't know, West Germany or France, it was not so easy.
Yeah.
They used the luggages every time, like they put the computers in parts between T-shirts and things like that. and,
Wow. I think you could.
and that's how they smuggled in the computers.
Okay, that sounds really like really crazy, crazy times. I mean,
Yeah, but it was also a bit strange to get the softwares outside from Hungary,
yeah,
because back that time, the softwares were on cassettes, these audio
yeah,
cassettes, and when they left Hungary with the master cassettes to bring it to the Western country, they were stopped on the border and they listened to this cassette. What is on these cassettes? And it was this beeping. And they were knowing nothing about computer games and computer softwares. And they were thinking, oh, maybe he want to smuggle out some secret,
yes,
this government secret. And yeah, it was sometimes a bit strange to leave the country with these programs. And later, when there was this floppy disks, they had to tell the government that we want to send out this floppy disk, and somebody came out and they put a stamp on it that this is contains no secret, even if he can't watch what is the content of the floppy, because he doesn't know anything about it. He just checked it. Okay, I don't see anything suspicious on it, so you can send it out.
Yeah, I mean that's really fascinating to listen, because on the one side there is this official company, as I said, with license, and the government loves it because it gets US dollars. On the other hand, maybe we are still smuggling, and but as you said, I think as I said, I think it was more easier in Hungary than from the other side. But
they thought we were the happiest barack back in that day. So yeah, at the middle of the 80s, it was not so strict here, the things, but it was still socialism, but it started to loosen up. And I think it started here in Hungary because this was not so hard to go to the other countries and smuggling things. Yeah, back in Russia or Czechoslovakia, or I don't know, other socialist countries, I think it was harder. So that's why I think it's one reason that it started here in Hungary among the socialist countries the first time.
So yeah, and it's very surprising because we are at the end of our time right now, and I've so many questions left. but the good thing is, if you also want to know more, you can you find the documentation on YouTube right now as a long play, but also with the link inside. If you want to support this documentation, you can watch the complete 7.5 hours long. And that is something that I really admire, because when I watch a documentation, I see the 60 minutes, 90 minutes, and say, yeah, we should 4 or 5 hours material, and say, yeah, then release it as bonus material. And so I really thank you that you make this available in a complete part. So
for Hungarian speakers, we have a 40-hour long extras, because we have all the interviews, but they were made in Hungarian, most of it, and it would be a really big job to make the transcription and then the translation for 40 hours in our free time. So at the time, it's available only in Hungarian.
Okay.
And what you mentioned, that are the interviews that we made in English.
Yep.
and that's this 7 hours long things. Also, they can find other parts of or other documentary there. But yeah, that's what the English speaking people can watch, and maybe one time we can make the translation for this 40-hour long version and then release it for the not just for the Hungarian speaking people.
Yeah. Okay. So, Szilárd, thank you for your time and also for the short but detailed view on this special part of development behind the Iron Curtain. And as I said, if you want to know more, you find it on YouTube. Just look for Mole Man 4, and then you find the documentation and all the links to the longer part. So, yeah, thank you again, and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.